Are you a Washington State public employee considering early retirement? If so, I want you just to take a minute. Close your eyes. Envision instead of sitting in rush hour traffic, you're on a beach, you're in the mountains, you're enjoying your retirement comfortably. You're doing all those things you've dreamt of. You've worked hard all these years and you want to retire early and pull that trigger and escape to that tropical beach. If you're that person thinking this video is for you. There are key gaps and pitfalls that if you're retiring early that I want you to be aware of. Hey there, public employees. My name is Seth Deal. I'm a former city employee turned financial advisor, and I'm a CPA. And I absolutely love helping public employees in Washington plan their financial futures and retire early and make those retirement dreams come true. If you're planning on retiring early, there's a puzzle that you have to put together with numerous moving parts and key components that you have to be aware of. And you need each piece to fit just right in order to make that early retirement happen. First off, let's start with your pension. What happens to your pension if you retire early? So the first thing to be aware of is depending on how early you take it and which pension system you're in, you're likely going to face a reduced benefit. And so it's really important to understand what that reduction is going to look like. For each plan, the rules are slightly different. So be sure to go to the DRS website, check out those specific rules, reach out to a DRS expert or a financial advisor that knows public employee benefits, and you can get help figuring out what that pension reduction looks like if you retire early. I'll be sure to do another video at some point walking through what those reductions specifically look like. However, the big takeaway from this is that there will be a reduction. For those retiring early, there are numerous planning points that you want to consider, such as not only with your pension, if you're going to face a reduction, but when do I start it? Do I start it right away? Do I wait till the next year? What do I do with this? And so it's really important to understand you have options and to plan for those options. If you are fortunately able to delay your pension a little bit, that opens up a whole host of different planning opportunities. The next piece of the puzzle that we want to think about is Social Security. When are we going to take Social Security? What's that benefit look like? And from when we retire to when Social Security kicks in, how long do we have? What's that gap of time where Social Security is not coming in? If you're waiting until 62, that gap's obviously going to be a little shorter than if you retire, let's say 58, that's going to be a 4-year gap. However, if you are pushing it off to 67, well, then that's a much larger gap that we want to be prepared for. And so knowing when your income streams your different income streams are going to be turning on is incredibly important. It's also important to understand how they potentially can change depending on when you turn those on. The next key component of that early retirement puzzle that we need to think about is healthcare costs. If you're retiring before 65, before you're eligible for Medicare, your healthcare costs are going to be quite significant compared to when you go on Medicare, and also much more significant compared to when you are working. So you need to think about, is a PEB healthcare option the best for me? Is something on the marketplace better? Can I go on my spouse's plan if they're going to continue to work? These are all healthcare components that you want to think about. Healthcare and taxes and housing are kind of the three really, really big expenses that we want to think about if we're retiring early. The last piece of the puzzle is that if you're retiring early, that means your retirement's going to last quite a bit longer, likely, than if you had retired at a more traditional age. So let's say you're retiring at 55, most folks, let's say they're retiring between 62 and 67. So that's a number of years that your retirement is hopefully going to be longer. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that we need to think about. And how do we position ourselves from an investment standpoint, from a pension standpoint, from a Social Security standpoint? How do we position ourselves to ensure we're able to have a successful retirement, do all the things we want to do, and really have a great retirement experience? Let's get into some specific strategies and action steps that you can take to prepare for early retirement, or at least to think about it if that's potentially on your mind. So the first thing we want to do is we want to know our numbers. We want to know, what's our pension going to be, what's the reduction going to look like, and be sure to factor in the survivorship option that you are potentially going to take when figuring out what your pension is going to be. You also want to evaluate what's our DCP and any additional savings we have. What are those balances, and how much can we pull from those investment accounts? Then we want to make sure we have Social Security nailed down. When are we going to take it? How much is it going to be? Depending on our spouse's work history, does it make sense to stagger those benefits as when we turn those on? There are a wide variety of Social Security related planning steps that you need to consider. And then we also want to make sure we know what healthcare costs are going to look like, what's our housing costs going to look like. Some of those large expenses in retirement, we want to make sure we've nailed down what those costs look like and how they impact our cash flow. Our next step is we want to figure out, how are we going to bridge that gap to Social Security? If our plan is reliant on Social Security, what do we need to do to ensure our living standards are met and that we're still able to do everything that we want to in retirement? One of the most important things I can emphasize to anyone I talk to is that when you retire, it's still important to do those things that you want to do, to still spend money, but with the caveat of, we want to make sure we're doing it within a framework or a plan that we have set up for ourselves. As I've touched on a little bit already, healthcare is going to be really expensive in retirement. So make sure you've gone through, you've figured out what your options are and how you're going to plan for those medical premiums as well as other medical expenses in early retirement before Medicare kicks in. The next key action or strategy that you want to think about is, how do I make sure I don't run out of money? And so that is a common worry that I run across, and it often leads to not enjoying retirement and having a fulfilling retirement experience. And so we want to develop a plan, a strategy of how are we still going to enjoy retirement, but how are we also not going to run out of money? At Life Focused Financial Advisors, we like using a guardrails style strategy with a distribution rate that can change. So with our guardrails style strategy, we're not the inventors of it. There are lots of folks out there that are smarter than I am that came up with this. However, we're a big fan of using it for our clients. So our top guardrail is basically we don't want to leave a mattress stuffed full of money when our retirement ends. So we want to make sure we're not hitting that upper guardrail by continuing to enjoy retirement, having a fulfilling retirement experience, and ultimately still spending some of our money. Our lower guardrail is basically that's in place so we don't run out of money. So that's really important that we stay between those two guardrails and we make adjustments as we go. That's one of the biggest things that I can emphasize to anyone, especially as we see market volatility. We want to have a plan in place for continuing to spend money and enjoy our retirement within certain limits and within our plan. The final strategy that I want to talk about today is taxes. Taxes, healthcare, and housing are often the largest expenses that we see folks having in retirement. And how do we plan for those taxes that we inevitably have to pay? The first component of that, especially if you're retiring early, that you should be aware of is what planning opportunities pop up if I potentially delay my pension a little bit. So if you're delaying your pension a little bit and you have a lower income year or potentially two, that is a prime opportunity to do Roth conversions. What that means is that we can move money from a pre-tax account to a tax-free Roth account by paying tax on that money today. And that's a really powerful strategy to consider if you're in that early retirement boat and can potentially delay your pension a little bit and create some lower income years. However, that's going to be really dependent upon each person individually and in your individual tax situation. We want to plan for those taxes. We don't want the tax man to just come in and take more than what we would like. We want to have a plan in place to ultimately maximize the amount that goes into our pockets. We also want to think about RMDs, required minimum distributions. What required minimum distributions are is the IRS ultimately wants their cut of your pre-tax savings. So if you got a tax deduction through a pre-tax retirement savings, you eventually have to start pulling that out. Currently, the age is 73, where once you get to 73, the IRS says, hey, you need to pull out a certain percentage of these pre-tax savings, so that way we can get our cut of that. It's very important to consider how RMDs will impact your retirement plan and to minimize that impact as much as you can. We've gone over a lot today when talking about the early retirement puzzle and how all those puzzle pieces move and fit together. It's really important that you factor in all the moving pieces that might be relevant for your situation. It's incredibly important to think about, if we retire early, how are we going to do that? And what is our plan? I love helping people retire early. And unfortunately, there are a lot of common mistakes that I see. If you want to check out some of those mistakes, be sure to check out the guide in the description below. And if you ever want to potentially explore working together, feel free to go to lifefocusadvisors.com. Thanks.